So it had been a very busy Black Friday at the 7-Eleven. Now, we don't usually even do specific Black Friday deals. This was 2019, and we'd done that bring your own cup deal the year before, and plenty of people had arrived with cups for infinite refills this year too, and we had to explain our store wasn't doing that promotion this year. Like every store, we had certain things on discount, but nothing really worth getting excited over. Now, despite that, from how busy the damn store had been, you'd have thought that we were giving Doritos and Mountain Dew away for free. I'd taken the shift thinking that it couldn't possibly be that stressful. I've worked retail at Target and Best Buy on Black Friday, and holy God, I'd rather drop a 60-inch TV on my head than do that again. This really happened to a customer, by the way. Anyway, that's not the point of the story. The point is that I've been rushed non-stop on my feet, and it wasn't until around 4 a.m. or so that I finally had a break where the store was at its usual, basically empty late-night state. And basically what I'm saying is that I was so busy, so rushed, that I have an excuse for failing to lock the back door when I'd taken out some of the cardboard earlier. I should have been more careful, but I wasn't expecting the store to be so busy with only me, Bugs, and January, this chick that I've been crushing on, managing the store. And so yeah, I left the back door open, and you know when I said that the store was finally empty at 4 a.m. or so? Well, it wasn't. You see, a seemingly unhoused individual had snuck his way in through the back door and was camped out in the small storeroom, helping himself to as many non-perishable goods as he could fit in his damn face. And by the time my coworker January had stumbled across him after she went back there to restock the Cheetos, half the guy's face was blue from talkie dust. Now, she called me in immediately, and I rushed in to play hero. This guy had been hungry, but not for anything healthy. He'd been tucking into some Twinkies and jerky and Takis and so much junk food that it makes me sick just thinking about it. And my God, he had been necking so many warm cans of Red Bull and Monster Energy. He was a big guy, and he'd stripped off his winter coat and sweater, and at this point, he was just wearing shorts and a dirty white vest. Now, based on the little nest that he'd made for himself in the corner of the storage room, I think he'd been planning on actually bedding down for the night there. Now, I was a little taken aback, but all I could really say was, "Hey, buddy, you know you gotta pay for that." And the guy just looked up at me and blinked, and I swear to God, I could see the moment it dawned on him that this stuff wasn't just free, and he was going to be responsible for the cost. Now, I felt a little bad for him because he clearly seemed to be homeless and very destitute and probably on drugs, even if he was colossally fat and eating junk food, but I still hated to be the one to tell this guy, who was obviously down on his luck, that he was liable for pretty much hundreds of dollars worth of snacks. However, then he stands up, and that talkie dust was flying everywhere, and he points this big chubby finger at me and says,
"And how the hell do you expect me to explain this to my wife?"
Now, once again, I'm a bit taken back. The dude's walked in and just sort of helped himself to our stock, and now I'm being angrily asked how he's going to tell his wife. I don't know, man. Maybe you shouldn't have eaten our snacks in the first place, I thought. And that's kind of what I say, only in a more tactful way, and then he starts screaming at me that if I hadn't wanted him to eat the chips, I shouldn't have left the door open as an invitation. I guess he kind of had a point. I shouldn't have left the back door open, but if you see someone's house is open, you just don't go in and start eating their food, do you? And I said this to him, and he thought about this for a moment like the answer might have even been yes. And then this guy says, "You're not calling the cops. And you're not calling my wife." So I say, "Okay, we can avoid all that if you can pay for all the items you've eaten, and then we can just sort of make things work." Unfortunately, this guy said that this wasn't going to work for him. He needed to find a solution where the cops and his wife wouldn't get involved, but he wouldn't be stuck with the bill. I asked him what he proposed, and he gave a few ideas. One, we made them the winner of our Black Friday sweepstakes, which is not a thing. 2, I go halves with him and pay for half the food, and then he could just about manage the rest. Obviously no. And then his final offer was that he would pay for all the food he'd eaten as long as January would do a full striptease for him first. Having the crush that I did on Jan and not being able to hold back on white knighting, I told the dude exactly where he could shove his talkies before instructing Jan to call the cops and let our other coworker Bugs know what was going on. Jan gave me this look that made me think that my white knighting may have gone down well, so I was feeling pretty cool in that moment when I faced down Mr. Talkie Man. Now, I figured that we'd have an argument for a while until the cops showed up or Bugs came to see what was going on. Instead, all 300-plus pounds of Talkie Man came barreling at me with a speed I would never have expected from a man of his size. It was like Big the Cat had fused with Sonic and gotten all 7 Chaos Emeralds. And congrats if you're autistic enough to get that joke. No, I'm not a small guy, but I'm not big either. I'm pretty average in every way, wink wink. Now anyway, distraction aside, I'm not big or tough enough to take the full brunt of being slammed into by this Talkie Man's considerable bulk. His hefty stomach bounced me to one side, and I just went tumbling into a pile of Charmin's toilet paper. It could have been worse, I suppose. So then Talkie Man bursts out of the door of the storeroom with me scrambling after him. I hear Jan screaming something, and then this huge crash that sounded like the sound of a body slamming headfirst into a now locked back door. It sounded like that because that's exactly what it was. This guy had tried to flee the way he'd come, but he didn't count on the fact that Bugs had locked the back door while Jan was calling the cops, and so Talkie Man had charged headfirst into what he believed to be an open door, only to be sent flying backwards into a choke slam by the most jacked, roided biker of a coworker that I'd ever had the pleasure to work with. Now, I have no idea why we called him Bugs, but he was an absolutely huge, muscular guy who was able to choke slam this homeless dude to the ground and then pin him in place until the cops arrived. The 3 of us got into a bit of trouble for leaving the back door unlocked, but there was no camera footage showing who had failed to lock the back door, and we all agreed to keep that bit of information to ourselves, so the worst we had to deal with was just some lecture from the area manager about mindfulness and safety. Now, the Talkie Man had faced some weird charges. He avoided a breaking and entering charge due to the back door being unlocked, and despite the sheer volume of what he'd eaten, and the fact that he'd eaten it on the premises, it was dropped to a shoplifting charge which led to a fine and a suspended sentence. Oh, and remember how I said he appeared to be unhoused? The dude was married with a wife and kids. I feel bad for him in a way. He seemed to be suffering from insomnia and some sort of mental health issues due to the stress from his job, and had started taking Ambien, and it was kind of decided that the Ambien was making him act a little crazy, and I'm not sure though. And I'm not sure I can really blame the Ambien either. I think the guy may have just been hungry for Talkies. I never used to work Black Friday, I flat out refused. And so as a compromise, each year I agreed to stay late with one other colleague and prepare for Black Friday. It wasn't such a big deal back then. We'd just run a big sale on the Friday and that was it. You know how Black Friday used to be. But it did mean setting up some nice displays the night before and making the store look presentable and exciting. Now, this was back when sales weren't run every 5 minutes, so they were actually quite a big deal if you were trying to save money. Now, remember when the January sales used to start after Christmas and offered some really great savings that you'd never find at any other point throughout the year? Black Friday was like that, but just a single day. So I refused to work Black Friday because I cannot deal with that many demanding customers, but I was happy to take charge of the lovely, quiet setup the night before. Now, as I recall, I was setting up a pyramid of VHS player boxes when I first heard the sound. It came from near the kitchen appliance section, and I knew that neither of my coworkers were around there because I could see them, and it sounded like a refrigerator door opening and closing, which was kind of eerie because there was no reason why any of them should ever be opened outside of a demo. In my infinite bravery, I decided to ignore it and move on to the next display, which was a set of discount stereo system components. Then one of my colleagues came over to me and asked if there was anyone else here, because they were sure that they'd seen a 4th staff member hanging around in the area where the camcorders and cameras were. I told them no, it was just us 3, but we'd go investigate. There was no sign of anyone, but one of the cameras was slightly misaligned as if it had been moved, and I decided to check the footage, and that's when I saw something odd. There was a few seconds of film that showed a guy with a very thick mustache and big, thick Coke bottle glasses staring into the camera, almost looking like he was in shock. And then quickly the footage ended. Unfortunately, the display model was not correctly set up for the time and date, so I wasn't able to see for sure exactly when the strange recording had been made. The answer was soon provided for us, though, when the storeroom door visibly creaked open in front of us and then just slammed shut. Now, there was no way that this was me or any of my colleagues, and so the three of us ran to the storeroom and did the bravest thing we could, and we locked it from the outside and then looked in through the window. That same guy that we'd seen on the film was sitting in the corner of the stockroom, dressed in pajamas with a sleeping bag on the floor beside him. Obviously, in that moment, we called the cops. And it turns out that what had happened was the customer had hidden in the store at closing that night so that he could be able to be there bright and early when we opened for Black Friday by never having left the store in the first place. In many ways, it was all kinds of wholesome, other than the breaking and entering. However, things took a darker turn when the cops searched through the guy's belongings, and they found a camcorder taken from the shelf, and I guess I hadn't noticed that it was missing at the time. And the footage they found on there was very disturbing, though. He must have filmed it within the previous few hours, and it included footage of both myself and my other female colleague on shift in compromising and very revealing positions from under the stalls. This creep must have been hiding in the bathroom waiting for us to enter, and having worked out how the camcorder worked, decided to give him some overnight entertainment to keep himself occupied while he waited for Black Friday. Naturally, we pressed every charge in the book, and he faced some pretty hefty consequences. Now, I was less impressed at the footage having been played back in court, but it was worth it just to send this complete creeper down for a decent amount of time. Now, I'm sure he's long since released by now because this was quite a while ago, but I hope I never have to encounter that creepo weirdo Black Friday pervert again, if he's even still alive. And maybe it makes me a bad person, but I kinda hope he isn't. So I've been working at a Walgreens for over 30 years now. Now, this happened just a couple of years ago, and to this day it remains one of the most disgusting things to ever happen, but not to me, but a colleague. Now, Jamie was a new girl working checkout at the pharmacy. I'm a pharmacist, so I sign off and dispense prescriptions, but Jamie sold over-the-counter medication and would hand out prepared prescriptions over to the customer, etc. And so checkout staff at the pharmacy have a small degree of medical training, but nothing really major. If a customer needs proper medical advice, they'll be sent over to me or one of my colleagues, and if we can't help, we'll advise them to seek medical attention. Now, this one day, a middle-aged guy comes over to Jamie at her post. I'd seen him before, collecting prescriptions with his wife, and I was pretty sure that he had 2 daughters as well. This time, he was alone. He told Jamie that he was suffering from a rash on his upper thigh, and it was extremely aggravating. He told her that he'd taken some photos with his camera phone that just showed the rash and would be easier and less embarrassing than having to show his actual thigh. Jamie should have directed him to me, but being inexperienced, she agreed to take a look at the photo. But as it was, she deduced that the rash was caused by some kind of allergic reaction and to try an antihistamine cream which should help the rash go down. All was well for about a week, and then that rashy guy returned. He said that initially the cream had helped, but it stopped being effective, and he'd taken a new photo to show the current state of things. Now, this made sense to Jamie, as it was entirely possible that he simply needed a stronger dose of the cream, something she'd mentioned to him beforehand. This time, as she tells it, when he showed her the photo, it was angled slightly differently, and you could unfortunately see a small sliver of his nut on the right-hand side of the photo. Jamie tried her best to hide her blush, and she was only 19 after all, but this dude didn't seem to notice. She recommended that he try a stronger version of the cream, and hopefully that should clear things up. Now, a couple of weeks later, when I'm on shift, he shows up again. I notice him this time, and it sort of nags me in the back of my mind that he always happens to show up when Jamie's on shift, even though she worked very limited hours per week as a temporary job while studying some kind of biology at college. Now this time, when he shows her the photo, you can clearly see the majority of his left ball and a sliver of, well, you know what. Jamie, ever the professional, did not acknowledge this despite flushing very red. Now Mr. Rashman asked her if she was okay and even joked that his bare thigh was turning her on. Now I overheard this and made a note to talk to Jamie after he had left to let her know that she didn't have to deal with people like that. Now she eventually admitted to me that the photos had become increasingly revealing and she hadn't entirely known how to deal with that. At that moment I was furious. However, she explained to me that sometimes on iPhones, they don't show you the entire area of the photo, and it's possible to accidentally show slightly more around the outskirts than intended. I told her I thought that she was being extremely generous and to be super careful around this creep. Now, eventually, he turns up again, and shock and horror, his rash has returned. He tells Jamie that he's taken the photo as tastefully as possible, but he needs to show the full rash. And so, as you can expect, he whips out an entire picture of his wiener, with only a portion of his right ball hidden. Now, furthermore, the rash was the same size as it always has been, which, as Jamie then realized, was an almost perfect square. And she handled herself great. She said that she was extremely concerned about the customer's safety and that there was a severe risk of permanent loss of function, and she had to call the trained pharmacist right away. Now, this guy immediately started freaking out and said it wasn't a big deal and to not bother me, but Jamie called out saying that she had seen evidence of a potentially devastating injury and could I help. Now, this rash guy was torn between worrying about his harassment being outed and slightly believing that Jamie was telling the truth that he was about to maybe lose function of his yoo-hoo. And so I came straight out of the pharmacy and he refused to show me the photo. I asked him why he was comfortable showing Jamie but not me, and I'd seen it all before, and he started stumbling over his words and didn't have an answer for me. I half expected him to turn and leave and never christen our door again, but instead, he did something very unexpected. He grabbed a bottle of cough medicine and threw it hard against the counter, causing it to burst, and then he fled in the ensuing confusion. I'm not sure if he thought the cough medicine would function as some kind of kung fu smoke bomb or what, but clearly he'd forgotten that as a client of the pharmacy, we had his name and address, as well as all the details of his family. Now, we reported the whole incident to the cops, who said that they may not have been able to pursue any sort of harassment charges, as he could have claimed accidental reveal, but that by smashing the cough syrup, he implied intent with his behavior, which allowed us to press charges for that and involved his wife finding out about everything. Clearly, he just wanted to intimidate a young pharmacy worker, and instead he ended up on the offenders registry. Probably not the outcome he was hoping for. So I've been a head loss prevention officer at my local ASDA for close to 20 years by this point, and I've seen some wrong-uns on both sides of the fence, let me tell you. There was a shoplifter, big, buff, tattooed bloke who would only nick scented candles, and then there was the young lad on the checkout who played five-a-side with us who turned out to be pretty weird with kids. Now, none of them hold a torch to Nick, though. Nick made Gary Glitter look like a decent bloke. Well, maybe not quite that extreme, but he was certainly a massive C-word who I would not shed a tear for if he unalived his own life, as the talk-tick kids might say. And so Nick was the most zealous loss prevention officer I've ever met. This was mostly a good thing for lads like me who take the job seriously with military precision. If anyone swiped a jar of Marmite or a pack of crumpets, Nick would be on them like flies on poo. Like he'd frog march them off to the security office and then he'd spent around half an hour in there, and I'd swear down that that person would never shoplift again. Now, I'd never heard any complaints about Nick. Not one, but I guess it turns out when you scare people into silence, they don't tend to complain about you. To this day, I do not know what Nick said or did to persuade the guy to go straight. For all I know, it was the same thing. But when I found out that he was persuading the young girls to go straight, well, it made me sick to my stomach. It was a total idiotic coincidence how I caught Nick at it, though. I was in the security office and I managed to get myself locked in the security closet. Don't ask me how. To this day, I couldn't explain it. Fate, maybe. And so Nick brings this girl in, maybe 18 or 19, and immediately he's explaining to her how he's not just a security guard, he's secret police. And then he flashes some kind of badge which I couldn't make out through the slats in the door, but I guess it was pretty convincing because the girls start crying and begging and apologizing. And so Nick tells her that he's only pulled her aside because, get this, she's a suspected enemy of the state. Apparently there are things that flag up to his people and he has to pay extra special attention to them. He's implying to this last that his people would be capable of disappearing her unless she cooperated. Nick's idea of cooperation was, to put it mildly, obscene, and the way he explained it, the items she was stealing, in this case bread, tomatoes, and beans, was a code combination for other agents to know that she was strapped with explosives. It was clearly some absolute nonsense, but long story short, he could make any trouble go away if she let him take some shots of her without clothes to prove that she's not wired or strapped with explosives. Now, I have no idea if this girl believed him, but she certainly believed that she could avoid escalation if she just did what he said and stripped off for him. And so I was there stuck in the damn closet while he persuades this girl to explicitly make it clear that she's not wearing a wire. Now, had this been how he'd achieved such a high record of handling shoplifters, did he basically just blackmail them to strip down for him in exchange for turning a blind eye? Was the bizarre secret agent aspect some twisted gimmick? Did anyone fall for it? Did any of this matter? Not me. I saw red, and managed to kick the closet door open, catching Nick in the act of taking a horrifically explicit shot of this girl bent over the table while she was crying and apologizing. Now, I have a daughter. All I could see was red, and I didn't care if this was his first time or his 50th. I was going to drive Nick away in the same way that he'd been dealing with shoplifters. I told the girl to get dressed and get out of there, and ask her to trust me that I'd deal with Nick if she didn't call the cops. But I didn't hold back. I gave Nick the beating of his life, and then forced him to strip in the way he'd forced that girl, and who knows how many others, and I took photos. Now, none of this was sensible. I'm not proud of it. Now, I should have reported him, but sadly, I know how impossible it can be to achieve justice for crimes like this. And so giving Nick a beating he'd never forget and lowering myself to his level, maybe it wasn't right, but it felt like the best option I had. Finally, I told him if he ever quit the job while I was there, if he prevented me from being able to keep a close eye on him, I would find him, and I would make him regret ever trying to avoid me. I told him I had him by the short and curlies, and I'd never be letting go. And if I ever found out that he'd been up to his old tricks, his life would not be worth living. I guess men like him are cowards, because he believed me, and to this day I still work with him. Maybe I should have reported him, but I have no idea who his victims were, no idea if they'd play ball, and I figured that it would be better that I kept an iron vice grip on his. I remember when I did my onboarding at my grocery store, and I had to watch some BS video teaching me all sorts of crap I already knew, and a bit of stuff that I didn't. One of the main things that I did know was that you shouldn't directly confront aggressors or shoplifters. You should let them steal the item and then call the cops. I knew this, with or without the video, but it's such a hard thing to actually convince yourself of. If I see some dude stealing something, it's in my nature to want to mess that guy's day up. I don't want to sit back and call the cops, you know? I want to dive in there like some kind of manly, badass hero like LetsRead, my favorite YouTuber male role model. And so this video says something like, "Do not engage. Under no circumstances must you put yourself in danger. The shoplifter could be armed. They could be dangerous. Your life is worth more than a tin of Spam or a potato. This isn't the Apple Store. Blah, blah, blah." And so I'm thinking, fine, sure. I'm not dying for a company that probably won't even remember my name 5 minutes after the funeral. So I kept my head down, followed the rules, and did my job exactly as I was trained. Now, it was just a stupid grocery store job. I was a stalker. We all got by via doing our jobs and really nothing else anyways, and it's how you survive a minimum wage job in the first place. But then came in a guy named Doc. He wasn't a doctor. I don't think he even had a PhD. He was just one of those guys who liked calling himself Doc because I guess his real name was Walter or something that didn't sound very cool. And so Doc watched the training videos, and he came back saying to us something like, "No way am I letting people steal from right under my nose." Now we respond, "Sure thing, Doc, old pal. Wait till you're up against a 6'5" biker stealing a can of beans. Who needs the money?" "Should just get a job like the rest of us," Doc said, as if he hadn't gotten the job because his uncle was the assistant manager. Now from then on, Doc was on the lookout for shoplifters. He was determined to catch one in the act just so he could prove himself and take down one of the bad guys. Now weeks had passed and then months, and Doc was stuck as a shelf stalker just like myself. The handful of shoplifters had been handled by the security guards, and Doc was itching to spot a baddie who could be his little nemesis. Now eventually, that nemesis showed up. She was a very old grandmother-looking character, later discovered to be in her 80s, and she walked around with a stick, browsing the shelves and examining the items. Occasionally, she put some old person food in her basket. But then, while Doc and I were watching her, this old lady slipped a small can of sardines into her purse. And that was it. She'd stolen something, and Doc was ready. This was the moment that he'd been gearing for. Now, I tried to tell him that you have to wait for them to leave the store to prove intent to steal, and I tried to tell him that there were really good reasons to wait and call the police. But Doc just scoffed at me and said, "You don't mess with Doc," and approached this old lady. Now, Doc was not the most tactful guy. He went straight in and said something like, "I saw you steal that can of sardines. I think it's best that you accompany me to the security office," as if this junior stalker even had the ability to handle shoplifters. Now, the old woman just sort of looked at him, almost with pity, and she reached into her purse, and I was hoping that she'd just remove the sardines and pretend it had been a mistake and everyone could move on. But no. What she pulled out next was a goddamn butcher's knife. I don't remember exactly what she yelled, but it was something like, "You'll never take us alive, officers." And then, with a strength entirely unexpected from a frail old lady, she plunges this butcher's knife straight into Doc's chest, right by his heart. And the next thing I hear is the old lady murmuring something before running faster than I would have possibly ever expected her to, towards the exit and disappearing off into the parking lot. I don't think any of us ever spared the old lady any more thought at that moment. We were all tending to Doc and putting pressure on that wound around the knife and calling the paramedics, calling the cops. Now, long story short, Doc survived, but barely. The blade nicked his heart, and if it had been any further to the left, he would have been done for. And believe it or not, this old lady got away scot-free. Security footage seemed to suggest that maybe she was someone dressed like that. Honestly, looking back, it was all utterly bizarre. Now, it certainly taught Doc the reason why we were told not to engage with shoplifters. You never know when the old lady stealing sardines might be a knife-wielding maniac who nearly ends your life. So this story happened on a Black Friday. The sun had just set and the bargains had been bought, and the nearby Target, in my mind, was a war zone. I did not envy the folks who'd be on cleanup duty the next day, and for me, though, it wasn't a problem. I was the manager of a gas station. We didn't have to worry about Black Friday all that much. We just had to make sure that we had enough hot dogs on the griddle, nudie magazines on the shelves, and Baja Blast in the cooler and the shotgun loaded behind the counter. It was just me and Bad Charlie, one of my coworkers. He was called Bad Charlie on account of his brain being bad. Now, nowadays, you probably wouldn't call him that, but it's how Bad Charlie, who was a sweetheart, liked to introduce himself. Now, Bad Charlie was mopping the floor, and I was kind of just deliberating over whether it was time to toss the hot dogs onto the roller, and it was. And then an old fellow approached me as I was getting the garbage bag to toss away the wieners, And then he says something like, "You tossing them, pal?" So I said yes, and he asked if maybe he could have a few. And so I respond, "Sure, do you want them with buns?" And then he says, "Yeah, that's how you do a hot dog." Now, it was a bit sassy for my taste, but whatever, so I just let him take a few hot dogs, direct him to the condiment station, and then go back to doing some admin on the old Windows ME computer that we had back then. You might remember it. Now, around 10 minutes later, Bad Charlie comes up to me and kind of tugs my sleeve, saying, "Hey, we got a problem." And there's always some problem with Charlie. Usually he saw an adorable mouse and wants to make sure it doesn't get hurt or some nonsense like that. But this time, he had a point. The old guy had made his hot dogs, but created an absolute apocalypse of sauce over at that condiment station. It looked like someone had exploded over there. And considering Bad Charlie had just spent half an hour cleaning up the condiment station, he was a little upset. And so was I, considering that the hot dogs had been a freebie for this old idiot. Now, I assumed that he'd made his mess and long since gone, but it turned out that he was still there, and in fact was storming up to the counter, one hot dog in each hand.
"These doggies be some steaming pile of overcooked shiznay,"
the old man drawled up. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, they were old hot dogs that I was about to throw out, and he asked if he could have them for free. And Bad Charlie was asking me about what he was talking about, and I didn't really care to explain to him. I just told the old guy that if he wasn't happy with his dogs, then he's welcome to provide me with his receipt, and I'll get right on that refund.
"Refuse this,"
he yells, hurling the hot dogs at me. Now, one misses, splattering the "Hang in there" poster in the back, which is a zombie dangling from a noose, and the other dog hits me square in the face, sending the condiments dripping down my cheeks and the wiener landing at my feet. Now, I'm too shook and kind of amused to really react, but Bad Charlie is not. He grabs the old man by the shirt and starts yelling how that ain't very nice and you shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth. Now, before any drama can unfold, the front door bursts open and some woman rushes in holding an expensive-looking MP3 player in its box. Now, she's yelling that she needs help because she bought the last cheap iPod at the Black Friday sale, and now there are customers after her, and could she please hide out there until they go away? Now, normally I would say yes, but the angry hot dog guy is still present, so I don't really want to seal the gas station with this dude inside, and so Charlie seems to have an idea. He grabs the old man, drags him to the front door, and throws him outside, and then yells something like, "This guy's stolen the lady's iPod. Someone help her." Now, immediately, about 5 or 6 people come running from the direction of that target towards the old hot dog dude. Now, he has no choice but to flee as Charlie locks the door, and we stand and watch as the angry customers chase that dude off, without the iPod, off into the darkness. I go and clean up, while Charlie explains the situation to the lady with the iPod. She's extremely grateful and explains that she genuinely believed that the other customers intended to do her serious harm if we hadn't directed them away. Part of me felt bad that we'd endangered the old dude with the hot dog, but the part that still had sauce dripping down my face didn't feel too guilty, and that he'd have to outrun an angry mob. It just goes to show that sometimes charity will get you nowhere, and simply achieving good luck will be enough to make people want to hurt you. On the plus side, Bad Charlie had an opportunity to feel like a hero, so things could have been a lot worse. All in all, not the worst Black Friday I've had, but that's a story for another time. So some years ago now, myself and my then boyfriend went to Mexico City on vacation. It was absolutely beautiful, and we followed the tourist guides and kept ourselves as safe as possible. I made sure that my boyfriend and I rarely separated. Well, he made sure, really. He was a protective guy and deeply cared about me and my safety. And as you'll notice, sadly, I'm referring to him in the past tense. I don't know that he's dead, but I've obsessively read and researched similar cases to have a good idea of what happened to my beloved Mario. Now, we were visiting a large mall just outside of Mexico City and had everything you could want, cheap technology to the latest fashion to wonderful old vinyl records. We both grew up in poor, rough parts of Mexico, and this vacation was a dream for us, really. We've been exploring like tourists, convincing ourselves what it would feel to be like the people who could just visit the country and spend time in the safe areas, avoiding the cartels and the violence and the burning tires and the screaming and all the parts you don't want to hear about. Now, visiting rich parts of Mexico City was kind of like our Disneyland. Now, the night before, our tour guide had taken us to the Capolitas out in the wilderness. He said it was little known by tourists, but because we were locals, he was happy to take us to visit. It was a shrine to Santa Muerta. It used to be common to find public ofrendas that locals would come to and pray, and there would be tributes to Our Lady of Guadalupe, Santa Maria, or St. Jude, Santo Juan Diego, etc., and many classic saints, but in recent years, worship and tribute to Santa Muerta has flourished throughout Mexico. We are a people living in the shadow of death, and why should we not turn to Lady Death herself to hear our prayers? Death is invited upon us all, Dios mediante, and should not the Madre de Muerta receive her tribute? Will death not smile upon us if we kiss her feet and pray for bliss in the inevitable? And that is what many believe, anyway. Many others believe that the cartels have drenched our country in blood and forced Santa Muerta into the spotlight. I don't know. I just know that myself and my dearest Mario followed our guide out into the desert that night, and we made our offerings in front of Santa Muerta. And then within 24 hours, I never saw Mario again. We were exploring the mall. We didn't have many pesos to throw around, just window shopping was fun, and we would dream. Looking at the latest fashion, trying on risque dresses for Mario's approval, checking out the latest iPhones and browsing the latest records. We felt like shiny, happy people like the song goes, and then Mario needed to go use the bathroom. It was the first time all day that we'd been intending to separate, and I wanted to browse the lingerie store and maybe buy something secret for him, so it seemed like the perfect time. I found myself caught up browsing the bras and panties and fascinated and kind of horrified at how expensive it was to buy a piece of fabric that barely covered anything, and in the end, I settled for a lacy nightgown that was tasteful but sexy, and the sales clerk rang it up and I went outside ready to greet Mario. But there was no sign of him. I walked around the mall, calling for him, looking for him, but to no avail, and I went to the bathroom. Now, I must have seemed like some huge freak standing outside the men's room, calling Mario, Mario through the doorway, but there was no reply. And in the end, looking around and seeing nobody present, I quickly ran in there just in case. All the stalls were empty, all the urinals unoccupied, and I kept on investigating until an old white man came in and exclaimed, "Goodness me," in a very shocked voice, and I pretended that I was the cleaner and just quickly left. Now, I contacted mall security, and at first they wouldn't take me seriously at all, but then I kind of lied and said that we'd been worrying someone was following us. Now, on the cameras, we were able to see Mario enter the area where the bathrooms were, and then he never left. They checked the women's room in case he was in there somewhere, and of course he wasn't, and the only option that was left was that he'd left through the window, which was positioned in one of the many blind spots of the outdoor cameras, and then he left in a vehicle and was seemingly never seen again. Now, the next part was tearfully a blur to me. I remember telling detectives how Mario had recently proposed to me, and seeing a look pass between them like, yeah, this guy's left her at the altar, so to speak. But I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my Mario would just ditch me like that. That wasn't him, it just wasn't. And then I started researching cases of people going missing from malls and public places, usually a member of a couple to make it look like they ditched the other. As there was this one case that I read about where they eventually found the missing woman, and she was dead, and her body had been entirely hollowed out and filled with high-grade heroin, and then attempted to be smuggled over the border. Now every night I dream of Mario walking into that bathroom and being accosted by someone who'd entered through the window. They could have been let in by anyone, and then they could have knocked Mario out, taken him through the window with his accomplices, bundled into the back of a van, and then God knows what had happened to him since. Maybe he's still alive somewhere, being forced to work for the cartel. Maybe his body was used as a mule. Maybe whatever happened, Santa Muerte saw fit to make sure that his death was a peaceful one, if that's what occurred. Or maybe Mario really did just leave me alone while I was buying lingerie by fleeing through the bathroom window. If I found out this was true, I think I'd forgive him just so I knew that he was still alive. Every night I find myself praying to Santa Muerte that Mario simply got cold feet or decided he didn't love me anymore. The alternative is far too heartbreaking to bear. So around 2015, I worked retail on Black Friday and agreed to be there from opening. Never, ever again, though. It was the scariest incident of my life, and that was before I was nearly killed by an old man wielding a pickleball racket. And so the day started like any other Black Friday sales day. That is to say, all the staff were lined up like riot police, waiting for the doors to open and the customers to burst in and start fighting like it was a mosh pit over their 40% discounted TVs, or whatever else these other people like to buy on Black Friday. I don't know, I'm not a retail worker, I'm a security guard, and so I was on the front lines here, as you understand, but I was the first line of defense against angry moms wanting cheap baby formula or gnashing grannies trying to get their grandson a cheap Nintendo Playbox or whatever, and then insisting that I'm hiding the imaginary product from her. And I could see the crowd was getting restless through the front doors. The poor outdoor security staff were working extra hard to prevent a stampede, or what we like to call a crush, which is basically a stampede of people who could literally crush you. And at one point I was sure that I saw the glass on the front door start to crack. Well, thankfully I imagined that. Now we were all there, braced like we were ready for a riot when the doors were about to open, and I never felt more nervous in my life. I've worked Black Friday since, but this was my first time, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. Now let me tell you, when you see the footage of those riots and the way people fight each other to get their little bargains, it's not an exaggeration. If anything, it underplays the severity of what it's like. The doors open, and a human ocean bursts into the store. Now, I won't name the big brand store that I work at, I don't want to get fired, but pick one of the stores with footage of people going nuts over cheap televisions and discounted sound systems, and it's one of them. Now, each type of person you can imagine came bursting in that store that morning. You had the angry grandmothers with the sharp elbows and even sharper tongues, and you had the Joe Rogan wannabes who wrestled their way to the toy section trying to get the cheapest Furby or whatever boy's toy was doing the rounds. And then there were the big ladies trying to get their cheap hair dryers, and then all the types of everyone who wanted to get their hands on discounted 4K TVs and UHD players. Now you can't blame them. Some of the prices were obscene, and if I hadn't been at work, I might have been right there in the crowd fighting my way through for bargains like a rock'em sock'em robot or whatever. But alas, I was stuck corralling the crowd down the right aisles, trying to keep soccer moms from sucker-punching deadbeat dads, and I'm pretty sure at one point, I even saw some IRL streamer streaming the whole thing. Now, it was chaos, absolute chaos, just a royal rumble of retail that is far scarier when you're on the ground than any of the footage can possibly convey. But let me try, though. These are some of the things that just went down that day. 2 old men got in a fight over a bowling ball, which involved one of them smashing the other's knee out with said bowling ball. In the kitchen aisle, an angry mother of 4 got in a fight over the last blender, so she used the show model to try and knock her rival unconscious. Now this backfired, causing her to twist her wrist and the rival to swipe that blender out from under her. 2 different customers got trampled, including a broken arm, and thankfully there were no deaths, though. Now, quite possibly my favorite, though, was the 2 adult neckbeards who got into a fistfight over Magic the Gathering cards and ended up trashing the entire toys and games department by throwing each other against the shelving units. This also makes it sound like I wasn't doing my job, but trust me, I was. And so were the rest of my colleagues. If it wasn't for us, I'm convinced that there would have been deaths, multiple deaths. And the cops told us as much in the aftermath of the sale. There was so much damage, so much carnage that we ended up losing more stock to damage than we even sold. Now this might all sound comical and even silly, but I want you to consider this. Humans were willing to behave this way towards each other over a little bit of money off of a TV. One man broke another old man's knee with a bowling ball, like I said, and that injury will probably last for life. The blender to the head. Thankfully, that didn't cause damage, but imagine if it had shattered. That could have taken someone's eye out. And on top of that, we've got these absolute clowns who trashed an entire aisle of children's Christmas presents because they wanted to fight over some playing cards. It doesn't sound so silly and funny when you look at it like that, does it? Working security during Black Friday really severely challenged my faith in humanity. I had to start going to therapy just to convince myself that the majority of people aren't selfish, awful humans, and I'm not convinced that's untrue. The therapy might be for other stuff as well. So when you see these crazy videos online, remember these aren't just one-off events that happen in far, far away Walmarts. These are your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, and they're prepared to crack you over the head with a 4K monitor if it means they can save $20 on that Nintendo Switch they've been coveting. Now I'm convinced that somewhere, Satan's watching a Black Friday madness compilation on YouTube and just laughing his butt off. I just wanted to send this in to say, be careful if you ever go Black Friday shopping. I'd hate for you to lose your head over a Superman action figure or some rare Charizard. 'Cause know this, I've got dibs on that fella. The grocery store at the end of my block closes at 11 p.m. If you go after 10 p.m., you'll be able to get some good deals on discount products. It's also usually dead quiet, so you don't have to deal with other customers. Just one or two late-night shoppers like me and staff trying to stock the shelves to get things done early. That night, things felt weird on the walk over. It's only a 5-minute walk, but I was certain that I was being followed. I looked around and, sure enough, at a distance, there seemed to be a guy in a pastel blue hoodie and white pants. He didn't seem threatening, he was just sort of walking at the exact same distance behind me the whole way. If I stopped, he seemed to find an excuse to stop as well. And so I go into the grocery store, and down the end of the aisle I saw the guy who I believe had been following me. But that was absolutely impossible, I thought, because he definitely hadn't passed me, and so I head down the aisle a little, keeping an eye on my guy, and eventually I realize it's not the same guy, but he seems to be dressed exactly the same. Now, I don't know how to prove it to you exactly, but it definitely wasn't a uniform or a coordinated gang outfit or anything like that. What kind of uniform consists of a baby blue hoodie and some white jogging pants? Now, I heard the front door of the grocery store open, and in walks a guy who's been following me previously. The first thing he does is come and stand right next to me, looking at the same food that I was, these sort of nacho kits, if I remember, and just sort of standing weirdly close to me. It felt threatening, but without any direct threats happening, if that really makes any sense. And so I edged down the aisle, and the guy stuck to me like glue. Meanwhile, I could see the other, identically dressed guy just sort of standing there watching the both of us, pretending to eye up some cheese. Now, after a while, I head into another aisle, and who do I see but a third guy, dressed exactly the same. Now, he was just sort of looking at some cereals the whole time. Now, these didn't look like they were uniforms, and they definitely didn't work at the store, but the weird thing was, they did not seem to make any acknowledgement that they knew each other either. The only thing I was certain of was that they were all watching me. Now, I'm just a guy around 5'10" and not exactly some pushover, so I wasn't as worried as I could have been, but I don't know how to describe it. I got this really sort of dark and wrong feeling from all of it, like the people who were surrounding me had some kind of darkness to them. Now, I'm not normally the kind of person who gets paranoid or attributes things to the supernatural, but I certainly don't think that these boys were actually demons, but they felt demonic, if that makes sense. Now, eventually the one who'd spend most of his time standing right next to me moved off to do some grocery shopping of his own. I go around to the final area near the checkouts, and I see a fourth, identically dressed guy walking towards the second guy that I'd seen. I expected them to greet each other, but instead, they showed absolutely no sign that they even knew each other, and in fact, one of them apologized for getting in the way of the other. And there also appeared to be some kind of slight dislike between the two, which I still can't really explain. I sort of hung back, like a coward, and waited until all 4 of them had finished their individual small grocery picks. Now 3 of them used the self-checkouts. One of them paid at the kiosk because he had also bought cigarettes and a lottery ticket. And they all left at different times, and aside from that brief interaction near the checkout, they'd never even interacted with each other, really. Now, before you guessed that maybe they were siblings or quadruplets playing a joke, 2 of them were white and one of them was sort of a light-skinned black guy, and the 4th, I don't know what he was as far as race goes. Now, they certainly weren't related, and they seemed to be different heights. Now, they were the same age and wore the same strange baby blue hoodie and white jogging pants, and they all just sort of kept watching me, and I finally started to understand how those gang stalkers fall down that rabbit hole. And so when I got to the checkout, the elderly lady who rang up my items was someone that I saw there often as a regular customer, and she glanced around the store and then leaned in and whispered to me and asked if I'd seen those guys just now, who had all been dressed exactly the same. I said yeah, it was wild that there were 4 of them at one time, and she shook her head and said that in total there must have been 6 of these guys. 2 of them had left the store before I had arrived. And then she gave some speech about how she wasn't normally the superstitious type, but they gave her the heebie-jeebies. Now, I didn't blame her. I asked her if she had any theories, and now she said that the best she could come up with was that it was the Saturday after Black Friday, but did that even mean anything? Did that have any kind of significance? Now, I've never really been able to find anything. Now, the walk home was 5 minutes, but it felt like 5 hours. The checkout lady almost begged me to get an Uber home, but there was no way that I was paying for an Uber to drive around the corner, and I would have felt like an idiot. Now, I didn't see the guys on the walk home, and nor have I seen them again. I know it seems like an anticlimax, but it was by far the creepiest, weirdest things that's ever happened to me while out at the grocery store. Now, if anyone has any theories as to what was going on, that'd be great, but 2 of them watched me intently, one of them stuck to me like glue until he just suddenly didn't, and 2 of them ignored me entirely, and 2 of them had left before I even arrived. So one of them at least was interested in me. Why were they all dressed the same? Why did they have the same aura? Were they gang members who decided that I wasn't worth the hassle? What does everyone else really think? Because I may just be the only person out there who gets freaked out when someone's wearing a baby blue hoodie and some white sweatpants. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday night. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, LetsReadSubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.